Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, we're going to talk about preparing your canvas or your panel for paint. So the first thing we have to do is called priming or gessoing our board. Gesso is a special type of paint that has a chalky feel to it. Here's a bucket of some of the gesso we're going to be using in the studio. Now this paint has a specific purpose. We're going to use this on our masonite panels or wooden panels, or our stretched canvas that's raw, unprimed canvas. And by putting this gesso paint on top of these surfaces, we will have a surface that the paint's going to stick to and it's not going to peel off of. If we just took our acrylic or plastic paints, acrylic is the binder or the thing holding the pigments together in a plastic paint or an acrylic paint, and if we just put that straight onto the wood here, what would happen is eventually that paint would scrape or peel off really easily. So this primer is going to give it something to bite into so that the painting sticks around for a longer period of time. Let's get started and see what's involved in the process. All right, here we go. So we've got our canvas set up on an easel, and I've got all my materials out to get started on priming or gessoing our canvas or our canvas board. The following are the materials that you want to have. You're going to make sure that you have a utility brush over by our sink area. You're going to want to make sure that you have some gesso, and we'll have several of these containers out in the classroom. I'll also have some small cups out that you can spoon some of this into so that you can go back to your own individual working station and not have to rely on the group container here. For the demo, we're just going to work straight from the container. Also, make sure you get yourself a small half cup of water so that you can rinse your brush out. Grab a small piece of paper towel so that you can clean up any drips, any paint off of your hand, and then also to clean up the ferrule or the metal part of our brush here. So when we're going ahead and gessoing, the main rule of the game here is that you don't glob thick layers of paint onto your surface. If you do thick layers of paint, you're going to get lots of oozes and drips and kind of wrinkles on your surface, and this is going to be really difficult to paint on top of. So we want to do somewhere between 2 to 3 thin coats of gesso. You can even go ahead and lightly dampen your brush by dipping it in water. Knock off the extra water by just running the bristles along the edge of the cup. You can even go ahead and just tap it down onto your paper towel to make sure that it's not overly wet. Next, I'm going to load the bristles on my brush with the paint. So what I'm doing is I'm flipping the brush back and forth, and this is going to help kind of make sure that I don't have too much paint on my brush. And also notice that I haven't put so much paint or gesso on the brush that it's touching the metal part. If you have paint getting onto the metal portion of the brush, you're probably overloading your brush. Go ahead and knock off some of that back into your container and work with a smaller amount on your canvas. So let's go ahead and get started and begin applying the gesso. So the first thing you'll notice I do is kind of circular motions because we really want to work the gesso into the canvas fibers. And we want to make sure that we don't end up with areas that, again, have big globs or chunks of paint on the canvas. So I'm going to work around in circles, and then you'll notice that I do a smooth back and forth motion. This is going to help smooth out and feather any big areas or thick areas of paint. This is a slow process. You're going to want to be patient with it. You definitely don't want to rush this, because if you do, the quality or the craft of your painting is going to go down. It's going to look sloppy, messy, and almost as if you didn't care about it. So as an artist, your goal is always to invest a lot of care, time, and energy into your work, because it's a reflection of you. So let's have it be a good reflection of you. And if you're working at a table surface, it's not a bad idea to take a piece of paper and put that paper underneath your canvas or your panel, especially if you're using a masonite or a wood panel. for the folks in Draw Paint 1, and some of the projects in Draw Paint 2 are going to be on these masonite panels. Since we have some time, we're gessoing, let's talk about masonite. So masonite is a pressure-treated wood, which means that they basically take a bunch of wood shavings and then they glue them all together and press them. So anytime you're working with MDF, you want to be careful when you cut it down because some of those glues are a little bit toxic. But MDF is a really great, inexpensive surface to paint on. And then the wonderful thing, you never have to worry about it ripping or tearing because it's a piece of wood and it's impossible for that to happen. And then it's also really easy to present those artworks. All you have to do, you could use some Velcro tape. I think they call that 3M makes a series of Velcro attachments to hang things. One's called command strips. Those are really inexpensive. And that way you could take the piece of wood, just put the Velcro strips on the back, and then it could be hung directly onto the wall without even having to put a hole in the wall. So masonite's really great, it's inexpensive. You can also make really inexpensive frames out of some simple trim pieces of wood, like 1x2 or 1x1s or 1/2 inch by 1 inch. And then you can cut those down. But I love painting on masonite. Inexpensive, not as much prep time. Okay, so I'm getting close to being finished with my first coat of gesso. A lot of times students will ask me about the sides of their canvas, and that's a great question. You can choose to leave the side of your canvas raw or the unprimed or gessoed material, which is going to be kind of like a natural wheat color or like an off-white, or you can choose to prime them. It's really up to you. Definitely want to think about it though, because at the end of your painting, do you want the edges to be raw canvas, primed canvas, or you can also extend the painting to wrap around the sides. Sometimes artists will do patterns or just a different color that's really bright and stands out. You want to be careful of that though, so that you don't distract the viewer from the main action in the painting, which is going to be your focal point. So now I'm just looking around my canvas to see if there's any texture of the weave of the canvas that appears to not have gesso on it. It's looking pretty good so far. Again, you're noticing that I'm trying to push the gesso into the canvas as well as coat the surface of it. Got a couple more little spots that I want to hit, and then I'm going to set this aside to dry. If you're in a pinch and you need it to dry quickly, you can go ahead and grab, in the back of the room, we have some hair dryers, and you can just plug those in along one of the outlets in the wall and use that to speed up the drying process. This is another really good reason to apply thin coats of gesso, because if you put a thick coat down, it's going to take twice as long to dry. Maybe not exactly twice as long, but it's going to take longer. Now I'm going to go ahead and change the direction of my stroke. I'm going to go side to side now. This is going to help ensure that I've got that gesso packed into the canvas in all directions. Go back and forth with my vertical stroke now. All right, that looks pretty good to me. We've got a nice consistent coat. It's thin, and this is going to dry fairly quickly. I'm going to leave the edges of my canvas raw because I prefer that kind of look. I really like the way the raw canvas looks. And let's really quickly talk about gessoing your masonite panels. So with this, and I'm going to hold it in my hand just so that you can see. As I said before, I would love it if you can grab a sheet of paper or a small section from our craft paper roll and just put that underneath your panel so that we're not getting a ton of paint onto the desktops. So I've got my brush loaded with pigment. These are going to prime much quicker because obviously it's a much smaller surface, but also the material is not a fabric like canvas is. So it's not going to absorb or suck the water out of the gesso, so it's going to move around a lot easier. Again, I'm just going to kind of smush it around, little circles, just to coat the entire surface quickly. And then we'll come back and do our back and forth stroke to get everything nice and smooth and consistent. Go ahead and rest this up here. One direction, and that looks good. That's smoothing out any of these little gaps that I have. And turn it vertically now. We'll do one other direction. Let it dry and come back for a second coat. Okay. So now that I've had my first coat done, I'm going to let these dry. And when I come back, I'm going to come up front, grab a piece of our 150 grade sandpaper. So what we want to do at this point, after it's all dry, is just gently give a quick sanding. This is going to knock off any burrs or like little pieces that were clumps of gesso that might create a problem later on in the painting. After you've sanded, we'll do another thin coat, let it dry, come back, sand again, do a final coat of gesso, come back and sand it one last time.